Right, so Pythagorean theorem, one of the most famous formulas and one that you'll use very often for the rest of your math career. So spoilers, I actually hate a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I think that it helps students make mistakes. If you've seen some of the other videos in here, you know that I'm a fan of words, right? So words help us retain information. So in this question, right, we can kind of like name a couple of things here. So this side right here is the altitude, or sometimes called the height of the triangle. This down here, this is the base of the triangle, and this C, this is the hypotenuse. So a squared plus b squared equals c squared only makes sense if we already know what a, b, and c represent verbally. So one of the things that's always important for Pythagorean theorem questions, and I've kind of said this in other videos, the base and the height, wow, that was like the hardest H for me to ever draw in my life. The base and the height are always perpendicular. So what you're really trying to do in these Pythagorean theorem questions is see, hey, do I know the two perpendicular sides, or do I know one side and a hypotenuse here? So if we kind of like set this equation up, right? So I'd have my base squared plus my height squared equals my hypotenuse squared. So if we think about that as the Pythagorean theorem, and again, if you want to go a squared plus b squared or c squared, you're perfectly fine to do it. Let's write in the things that we know. So I always like to find the hypotenuse first. We'll see that when you talk trigonometry, this also helps out. So it's the longest side of my triangle. It's the one that's not perpendicular to anything. It's the one that's not touching the right angle. Either way, my hypotenuse is 16 squared. So I know a base or a height, doesn't matter what you call it, but I know one of the two perpendicular legs. So I have an 8 squared plus my height squared. So now common mistakes students will make. Number one, squaring things wrong. 8 squared is 16. 16 squared is 32. Both of those are wrong. You're just multiplying by 2. 8 squared is 64. I'm going to say now, I'll do it the school way, right? B squared for like your height squared, and 16 squared is 256. So we want to, so another mistake students make is they just square root everything at this point, right? Always isolate your variable on one side before square rooting. So we get a b squared, right? I would take 64 away. I would take 64 away. 56 minus 64 is going to be 192. So now that we have b squared equals something, we would square root both sides, right? Only at this point square root. And so b equals 192 is not a perfect square. It's going to be 13 and some change. So let's see what that change would be. So if I did the square root of 192, I get 13.85, and it said round to the nearest hundredth. Right, so I got 13.85. I think it was a 6 at the end of it. 856. Right, so in terms of our decimal, we have tenths, we have hundredths, and we have thousandths. So if I want to round to the nearest hundredth, remember I'm looking at this 5 right here. Since that's bigger than 5, I'm going to round up. So our answer is going to be 13.86, whatever our units. Our units are kilometers. If I look at this second one, this is going to be a nice one. This is called a Pythagorean triple. So if I look at this, right, base, height, hypotenuse, notice in this case, if I look for my hypotenuse, don't know it, that's my variable. So that's going to be an x squared. I got a base of 3 or 4, doesn't matter. As long as you're using one for the base, one for the height, you're fine. So I'm going to get 3 squared, which is 9, 4 squared, which is 16. So remember, add before square rooting. 25 is x squared. Let's hit this side with a square root because we need to undo squaring over here. And so we'll get x is equal to 5. So we're going to get 5 miles right there.